So as I mentioned, one of the other really interesting things that happened this year was all of the developments with NXIVM. So I'm going to bring Dr. Doyle in because he's been following this a lot as well. Dr. Doyle is one of our board members, as I mentioned. He's a great addition to our board, in part because he's very interested in the self-help industry, both as a consumer and also as a provider. He's a psychologist, and he's someone who's been interested in self-help for his entire life, pretty much. And he's also really interested in what's going on with the industry. So sometimes, some of these things like The Vow on HBO, which Dr. Doyle is going to talk about, I actually just watched it, but it took me a while to get there. Because I think for me, for my mom, it's a lot, for our family, it hits very close to home when we take these things in. So Dr. Doyle is kind of our resident watcher of the industry. And it's Ray, which is very helpful though.
Notice how effortfully Gene tries to stay away from saying expert. You don't want to say expert. He's our watcher. He's not, whatever.
It's important, people will say to me, so do you know what James Ray is doing? And I'm like, I don't want to have anything to do with what's happening. And then we meet Glenn, who's, paying attention to things going on in the industry. And that's been really, really important and very helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
I'm glad that I can be kind of our industry watcher, because as somebody who's engaged with the industry, I mean, I care about the industry a lot because, I mean, as Gene said, for decades, it's been my jam. Like self-help really, really helped me out at a time when I really, really needed the help. I mean, I wouldn't be a psychologist. I probably wouldn't be alive if not for the self-help industry at various times in my life. So I'm glad I can do that. And it's interesting whenever I go to James Arthur Ray's public Facebook page to kind of check up on what he's up to. I always see Gene actually follows that page, like how it says like so many of your friends like this page. Like, Gene Brown likes this. I'm like, does she really like it? I don't think she likes it. I think she follows it. Mm-hmm. The thing about The Vow and NXIVM generally, and it's important to remember that The Vow, which was this awesome series on docuseries on HBO, was really thorough. It's not the only series out there. There's also a series on the Starz network called Seduced. And I really recommend if folks are interested in learning more about the situation to, if you can, watch both series. There are also a number of podcasts that really go in depth about the situation, but and they tell it from a variety of perspectives as well. Like one of the things I like about Seduced on the Starz network is that it includes not only the perspective of people who were, really, really involved kind of from the perspective of members. Like The Vow kind of airs on the side of people who are running it and who are running the centers and recruiting people and whatnot. Seduced kind of airs on the side of folks who, were paying for these services, who were signing up for these seminars and who were really involved and who got kind of sucked in. Mm-hmm. Seduced also includes a lot of input from real experts in the industry. Like Seduced really leans on the input of folks like Rick Allen Ross and John Jalalich and Stephen Hassan. I know real experts in the psychology of group movements and cults and these kinds of things. But something that I really wanted to bring to the table tonight as just part of the discussion, because, look, this is the annual Kirby Jam. And by the way, if you guys are tuning in and you're watching the replay or something like this is a very different Kirby Jam than usually happens. Usually it's a huge party.
Yeah.
And everybody dances like that thing that Deborah did with the wine. Usually that's done in person, if you know what I'm saying. So this is a very different kind of thing. Like here we're all having a very sober discussion. Well, yes, the self-help industry. No, typically we're partying at this point in time. So it's very different. But something I wanted to make sure to bring to the discussion tonight is that one of the reasons why Seek Safely needs to exist And one of the reasons why we need to be concerned about the self-help industry generally is because, look, we've gotten hit over the head over the last 5-10 years with how when self-help goes bad, it can go really bad. We had the Sedona tragedy 10 years ago where 3 people died. Actually, not the first time people died at James Arthur Ray events. That he actually had somebody commit suicide at an event prior to that. He really covered it up. Still had people coming to his events. So that's become kind of one of the archetypal examples of when self-help goes wrong. Now it's in the news a lot with the NXIVM stuff. Like, sure, they drew people in with kind of the self-help facade, and people wound up in a sex cult, and people wound up kind of like in these really extreme situations. So we kind of had this idea of this is what happens when self-help goes wrong. And something I wanted to bring to the discussion tonight is that, look, those are some reasonably extreme examples of what can happen when self-help goes wrong. I want to be very, very clear. Those are the extremes. There is self-help going wrong all the time that we never hear about. There are self-help organizations like with the NXIVM thing, like we're hearing a lot about how Keith Raniere, the leader of that organization, used the self-help org NXIVM as kind of a front organization to have this kind of undercover sex cult harem thing that he had going on. And a lot of people are going to look at their involvement with the self-help industry and go, well, I'm certainly not involved in a sex cult, and no, I would never get involved in the sex cult. And so they think they're cool, and they think that they're not at risk. And something I want to be super, super clear about is that, look, the danger is not that you're going to, necessarily die in a sweat lodge. And a sweat lodge wasn't really a sweat lodge, but it's not necessarily that you're going to die at an event or that you're going to get sucked into a sex cult. The vast majority of the real problems we see with the self-help industry deal with financial exploitation, and they deal with leaders and practitioners offering advice that is actively destructive. And I want to say, look, even if you take, this sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but even if you take the sex cult part out of it, NXIVM was still hugely problematic.
Absolutely.
In fact, if you watch Seduced, like one of the people on Seduced, a young woman by the name of Ashley McLean, who I've gotten to know a little bit on Twitter, she says, look, I was apparently in a sex cult. I never had sex. I don't know what you're talking about. But when a lot of these people talk about how they were victimized, it has nothing to do with kind of that sex cult piece of it was a reasonably small piece. There's a terrible piece of it, but it was a reasonably small piece of it. You do hear stories of people saying, man, they really bilked me for thousands and thousands of dollars in a situation where I didn't really feel that I was in a position to turn it down. They had really put me in a position where, I was, in some people's situations, they were either indebted to the organization, because they would kind of lure them in with this whole idea of like, well, if you can't afford this training, like, well, look, we'll put it on your tab, right? And sooner than later, they found themselves tens of thousands of dollars in debt and really difficult to, kind of extract themselves from the organization. So you see that financial exploitation. You also see a situation going on. James Arthur Ray is actually doing this right now. One of his marketing shticks is that, look, come to my large group awareness trainings. That's what they are. They're called LGATs, large group awareness trainings. But come to my events and learn how to integrate your trauma, heal and integrate your trauma. Now, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I specialize in the treatment of complex post-traumatic disorders and dissociative disorders. I can't tell you how often, I used to work on an inpatient unit, where people would come and they were really in crisis and suicidal and stuff. I can't tell you how many times that situation happens because they tried to engage in a healing modality that either they weren't right for, and if they'd been properly assessed, they would have known they're not right for it, right? Or they were not at the right point in their treatment for that. Or there was something else going on, like another psychiatric disorder that hadn't been caught, hadn't been accurately assessed, et cetera, et cetera. So then we have James Arthur Ray, just as an example, saying, yeah, you've got trauma. Come on into my event and will heal and integrate your trauma.
Mhm.
You don't have to spend years in therapy doing this. Come on.
Yeah. Well,
Which
one of
was,
the things,
was similar to the shtick that NXIVM did.
yeah, I was just going to say their EMs, the EMs. I don't remember what it stood for, but
Exploration of meaning. Yeah.
exploration of meaning. Because in my mind, I kept it as emotional manipulation.
Yeah, big time. Big time.
What they were doing was it felt like they were bringing people to psychological breakthroughs in one session, and then just sort of dropping them off a cliff.
Absolutely.
And we know that that's extremely dangerous. I mean, there's a reason that therapy is supposed to take a little bit of time. You need to sort of work up to getting to that point. So it was horrifying to watch that. I said, oh my God, this is just so irresponsible. And like you were saying too, the financial aspect of it, another, as I watched The Vow, I noticed that all of these red flags that we list on our website, it was like ding, 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 ding. They hit all of them. Creating that like incredibly exuberant atmosphere. So they're on a high all weekend, not letting people sleep enough, not letting people eat enough. It's all of these different means of manipulation to be able to control people either emotionally or behaviorally or financially. And that's exactly what they were doing. Liz, who is watching with us, she asked the question, how much is spent each year on the self-help industry? And we know it's about $11 billion a year. So clearly people aren't spending $11 billion to join a cult.
And that's what we know about. That's all I want to interject. That's what we know.
Right.
If we kind of quantify things that we would call self-help, like large group awareness trainings and blah, 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 we can take a guess that's, over 11, but we really don't know. Like there's no way of knowing kind of on a local level. Like I guarantee you here in Chicago, I can get on Craigslist right now and find a dozen small groups all over the city tonight that are either, like alternative spirituality groups or support groups or whatnot that have like whatever, $5 or $10 donation. There's a whole underground economy that happens in the self-help world. So it's really, really, it's very much in need of attention, and it shouldn't take death, and it shouldn't take exploitative sex cults,
exactly,
to get us to the point where we feel we need to act. The one other thing I just want to make sure that gets out there into the conversation. A lot has been made of the fact that NXIVM's leader, Keith Raniere, spent the rest of his life in jail because he was doing things like human trafficking and I mean essentially slave labor. It's like really, really bad, very illegal thing. And he was doing them for years, and he got caught. Right. James Arthur Ray, he of the Sweat Lodge, was convicted of negligent homicide. Who, I'm not an attorney or a judge. I'm not one to opine on whether that was the appropriate charge to be convicted. He served less than 2 years in prison, and he's back in the self-help industry. Now, Keith Raniere is going to spend the rest of his life in jail. Like he's never going to be able to do it again. Yeah. Elizabeth Holmes, you remember the Theranos fraud? It happened a few years ago. Like part of her plea bargain was that she can't be the head of a company anymore. Like she was caught defrauding investors, so she can't do that anymore. Yet because there's no formal regulation of the self-help industry, we can't say to James Arthur Ray, you can't go back to doing this. Because there's no what, you can't go back to doing what? Like it's not a recognized profession. There's no license. We can't take away his license. If I did what James Arthur Ray did, and people died, 4 people died over the course of groups they would take away my psychology license forever, and they should.
That's right.
There's no license to take away with James. So that's one of the reasons why SEEK is so important, and specifically why this legislation is so important. In fact, had the legislation that we are advocating, that I think Tony's going to talk about in a little bit, had it actually been in place in New York, NXIVM wouldn't have even been a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So on that note, we're going to bring Tony in. Glenn, I'm going to kick you out for a little bit, but you can come back later.
Okay.
All right. Thanks so much, Glenn. For sure, you guys, if you haven't watched The Vow on HBO, you should take a look. It's really interesting. A little bit infuriating, but very interesting. And also Seduced on Starz.